Okay, I'm gonna try to start it. Because that was sort of the idea I had, would be that like when we first start, we would just sort of like, start, we're not technically starting yet.
Right.
Okay, so right now we should be live. And
Okay, it's taking me to.
I know, to the old link, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna find out if we're actually live. I just mute that, by the way.
Okay, it looks like we're live.
Oh, great. Well, then, so people can hear us. Hey, folks, if you're joining, we haven't technically started yet. We are just sort of gearing up because we haven't figured out how to be super cool and like get started from, I don't know, you all understand.
We're all doing our best.
Can we just start every time we do this by being like, look, we're all doing our best. Okay. Just first and foremost, I got to put up, okay. Got to make sure. I don't know if you saw Kira, but I got a bunch of questions for us.
Yeah, a few of them.
I love that. I love when people actually have answers or questions for us or whatever. All right. I'm going to jump on here and see if I can see. Oh my gosh. How many links do I have to click on? I mean, this is not hard. No problem.
Looks like we've got Betsy with us.
Betsy should be with us. That sounds right. Good morning, Betsy, and Happy New Year. Okay, we technically have 3 more minutes until we officially start. So this is our unofficial, like you and me hanging time. And people, it's like the Easter egg. If people come a little early, Kira, they get to hang with us while we're figuring it out. How was your Christmas, man?
It was weird, but
yeah,
not bad.
Did you guys do anything at the church that you were like, I don't know, I mean, that made you feel Christmassy?
So I was involved in 2 things that I really, really enjoyed this season. One of them was putting together a lessons and carols from the church.
Yeah.
And, just having different people send in their readings and then them all together. And one of my parishioners is the principal violist of the Nashville Symphony. And he and his wife both are professional musicians, and they submitted a couple carols for 2 violas. And
nice.
It was just a really lovely, like, I just miss everyone so much.
Oh my gosh.
And getting to like see them read scripture and contribute to like our worship life was really, really beautiful. And the other thing I did was also a Christmas lessons and carols with all of like Weird Anglican Twitter. And
yeah, you are a more active member of Weird Anglican Twitter. Well, you are an active member at all when I don't go on Twitter. I'm only on Twitter when someone tweets directly to me and then I see it or tags me in a tweet. Every once in a while, our friend Scott Gunn will tag me in a tweet and then I'll go on Twitter. Otherwise, I just don't even do it. So.
But for me, it's sort of my like, I've been a solo clergy person my entire vocation. And so Twitter is kind of my like water cooler. And where I can kind of go and chat with people about what's going on in the church or have, little theology discussions or liturgy discussions or whatever. And so, we put together a Christmas lessons and carols. Bishop Frank Logue did the like bidding prayer.
Nice.
Thing. Again, different people kind of did their readings from home. It was just kind of lovely seeing people in their like little prayer corners and Christmas trees, reading scripture, and I sang the Wexford Carol, and it was just like a really lovely thing to like the people that I interact with so much on the computer to kind of see their faces and hear their voices. And
I love that. We had a drive
together.
We had a drive-in church where people drove into a parking lot, and we had a radio station, and that you could only like transmit like within 100 feet and whatever, or whatever, not 100 feet, but you get like 100 yards or 200 yards or something. And it worked. It was really great. I saw people driving in and like I waved at, like I walked up to each car and checked in with each person from an appropriate distance and all that. And then when they left, like, like waving, it was like standing at the church door while people leave.
Yeah.
I miss, that is one of my favorite, standing at the church door, saying goodbye to people when they leave as an extrovert is like my, like, that's like, I miss that more than so many things. Right. So that was the closest I'd had. And I got to have it on Christmas Eve, and it was snowing, not a lot, but like dusting snow, like during the thing while we're all outside. It was pretty killer. All right. It is time to start. We have just been chatting, you all, but we are officially starting. Welcome to Ask a Priest Office Hours. We have our special guest, Kira Austin Young, who's now been with us long enough that it's becoming weird. It's not a cameo anymore.
Not a special guest.
No, I know. You're just a guest. I don't know. My guest host, my I don't know what you want to call it, but I've just keep having so much fun with you, Kira, that I keep asking you to come back. And last night I was talking to one of our parishioners, and I said something about doing this today, and they were like, "Will Kira be on?"
Aww.
I was like, "Yes, she will. It's worth your time. Kira will be on." So good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning to Betsy Berry, to Mary Osterbrock, to Lisa Grubbs, and to Leslie Martin, to everyone else who hasn't typed in yet or chimed in yet, who's watching or who will watch later. Since we are both of us, and there are people now who are checking us out from different places, I'll just say I'm Philip Duvall, and I'm rector of a church in Cincinnati called Church of the Redeemer. And I just love the idea of creating a space where you can actually just ask a priest questions that you like anything you ever wanted to know about Jesus, but we're afraid to ask, sort of thing, But the thing I love more than asking just me would be asking me and a friend and having us have the opportunity to chat about it. So why don't you introduce yourself, Kira, and then we'll start on some of the questions people have for us.
Yeah, I'm Kira Austin Young. I am the priest in charge of a church in Nashville, Tennessee called St. Anne's.
And you are, you are just one of those folks that you and I got to know each other through a mutual friend, like, I guess is 3 years ago.
3 years ago? I was going to say, when was that John Mulaney?
Came down to Nashville to see John Mulaney. So I bet it was 3 years ago. And we came down to see John Mulaney in concert. And that's when you and I met with our mutual friend, Meg, who's another priest in the Nashville area, not in Nashville proper. Anyways, and we hit it off, and you are someone who's writing and who's you and I was fair to say we mostly know each other through social media.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely how we mostly like interact.
Yeah. So getting to know you through social media, you've been a real, I don't know, anything I say is going to sound like sucking up, but you've been like a real model for me, like a real inspiration for me in terms of how I think about how I present myself to people online, and the way that you sort of incarnate, like honesty and vulnerability, and also like clarity in who you are, and like sort of what appears to be an unapologetic sort of existence in the world, so to speak, is helpful, I think, for me. You know what I mean? So I'm really grateful for you and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, that's certainly always like a work in progress, and it's taken a little while to.
I think I'm a person who has a hard time admitting when I'm a work in progress, and so I very much am a work in progress. But it's always helpful to be around others in our vocation who are open about that.
Yeah.
Because I think the more of us that are willing to say it, like the better off it is, right?
Yeah.
We had this situation recently in our diocese. I think you know about it, where our bishop resigned. Mm-hmm. And as a part of his resignation, he sent out a letter to the diocese saying that he's been struggling with alcohol addiction. And even mentioning it out loud, even though he wrote a letter to the diocese, I'm like, oh, am I doing something I shouldn't be talking about? But like, it's a public letter, right? Like the idea of talking about his issues feels taboo. But every one of us knows that, first of all, the clergy are people, which means they succumb to same issues as anybody else. But secondly, the weird dynamics of being clergy lend itself often to things like isolation and addiction issues that can happen. And so like him being honest about it, when people ask me about it, I'm like, I think it's really good that he told us. Like, I think it's really awesome that he told us. People like, but it was bad that, oh yeah, no, addiction sucks. It's unfortunate, but like not ever talking about it isn't good. Right. And so like there's strength. And I told him, like, when I talked to him, you said us, you talking about it creates a space where others like, where it becomes more real and like where we have, it's more like, so I say that just to say, and vulnerability is not like addiction. It's not like something that we struggle with in that it's bad. Vulnerability is actually, we struggle with it, even though it's really good. But your ability to show that vulnerable reality of yourself is a struggle to present the good to people, and normalizing that behavior, I think, is really helpful. So I think the more of us that are willing to do it, the better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, it comes from a place of, I think Nadia Bolz-Weber, who's a, famous kind of Lutheran pastor, writer, whatever, she calls it the theory of like, I'll go first. And so it gives people permission.
Right.
Like, and especially even in the Episcopal Church, there's still these like, we pride ourselves on being so progressive, so forward thinking, and yet there's still these ideas of like, well, he or she is a priest, like,
right,
we don't have real problems, or how dare a bishop have an alcohol addiction,
right,
and there's still that like part of our brains, right, so many of us, especially right now, are kind of struggling with what I sort of call like garden variety, like mental health issues, like anxiety, depression, and yet to even say like, yes, like I as a priest am struggling with that. I contacted my doctor about getting on some medication. Feels very much like, well, shouldn't I have been able to pray it away? Or
like I thought that only happened to,
if I really trusted in Jesus, like I wouldn't be having these issues. And like that's just not how those things work,
I think that giving your clergy permission to be human is one, so as clergy, giving yourself permission to be human is important. And if you're a parishioner who love your clergy, giving us permission to be human is one part of actually giving yourself permission to be human. Because I think what we see people do with clergy is the same thing we see with other kinds of people who are in positions of public trust or power or celebrity, although we're like D-list celebrities at best in our, but like we're a celebrity in the sense of like when I go to the grocery store, people recognize me and say hello. Like
not in the figures. I kind of talked about as being a public figure.
Yeah. I think that's really healthy. Like that's really one of our colleagues, I think Andrea McMillan, she helped me understand like we're public figures. It's part of our deal, right? Mm-hmm. But anyways, like that idea of people want us to be a little bit more than human because they need to know that people can be, but it turns out like none of us are. Like we're all having a hard time right now, for instance, right? I have not like sought a medical attention in that sense that you've described, but like I have a therapist that I go to regularly, and even that talking about, I remember one time I preached about like having a therapist. I preached about Jesus, but my illustration, I was talking about something that I learned in therapy and was like, so I see a psychotherapist or a psychoanalyst, and this is some of the things we talked about. And this person came up to me after the sermon and they were like, you are so brave. Yeah. And I was like, for what? Like, and she's like for talking about it. And she was like, and this was what blew my mind. She was like, no, for going. Like, you're not just brave for talking about it. You're brave that you would even go to a therapist. And I was just like, oh, friend, like, this is why I have to say it. Because for some people, even the idea that they need to go is like this deep stigma. Right? We haven't taken any questions yet, and we're 12. Good morning, Gary. Actually, our first question, Mary Osterbrock, you wrote us a question. So I don't think you missed anything. We didn't meet last week. And then the week before that, Kira, you were unavailable. So it was just me. It was quite boring for everyone else. I had a fun time, but less fun without you. But Mary has a follow-up question for us that I've already sent you, but I'm going to read out loud. I want to remind folks as I read this question, and then we are going to start with you're going to be the first responder, so to speak, Kira. But over the last several weeks, one of the conversations that we've been having with Kira, and we've had ongoing in different aspects of it, has been the conversation around abortion and specifically the Christian response to, and how Christians are meant to understand abortion, both from a spiritual standpoint, from a legal standpoint, from a personal standpoint. We've tried to sort of address all that. The reason that we have been spending so much time talking about that is because Kira is an author who wrote a book about it. Oh, look, I have it right here. Pro-Choice and Christian: Reconciling Faith, Politics, and Justice. And it's a phenomenal book, and is one of my favorite qualities of any book. It's not super thick. Okay. You can read it in one or two sittings and come back to it. And I've underlined a bunch of stuff, so I know where to come back and just look and kind of think through some things. But it's not a weighty tome, but it's not light fare either, in the sense that it's transformative in terms of the way you think about Jesus. Anyway, so we've been talking about abortion, and so we've brought up in a way that I think I want to see more churches talk about it. And in the midst of that, we've had some wonderful questions from folks. From Leslie's asked some wonderful questions, and some other folks as well. And so Mary Osterbrock wrote this question for us to ponder, and I'm just going to read it out loud, and then you can get going and we'll see what we think. Mary starts with a compliment, my favorite kind of letter. She says, "Thanks for a provocative discussion on such a thorny topic. I knew that the major Protestant denominations supported a woman's right to choose, but nothing about the reasoning behind it. And this was my chance to learn more. It actually exceeded my expectations." More compliments. I love these emails, and made me even happier about walking away from Catholicism decades ago. I never was a huge fan of any of those heavy-handed Judeo-Christian patriarchs and their controlling ideas about women. Anyway, it's hard for me to read that part because she's basically describing me. But anyway, my question is this: when anti-choice people want to save the life of the unborn, exactly what are they saving them from? Burning in hell? I don't think anyone believes that. Suffering? The birthing process is no picnic for mother or child. It's got to hurt. Oblivion? In the grand scheme of things, is oblivion such a terrible fate when balanced against the compelling needs of the mother? Ooh, these are big questions. Tough questions. I guess we've set the table for such a thing. So what's your first response to the questions that Mary's asking?
So when I first when you sent me that question, I was like, this is a really kind of thought-provoking question. And I think what I sort of immediately want to do is sort of challenge the presumption. I think we often talk about being saved from something.
Yeah.
Especially in the church, maybe.
Yeah.
And we very rarely talk about being saved for something.
Yes.
Or towards something.
Right.
And so I have sort of long been a pro-choice person,
right.
Somebody who's supportive of reproductive rights for women. But I would say, even from my perspective as a Christian, that I would want, any potential of life to be saved for or towards, the ability to have that life, if at all possible.
Right.
Where it gets thorny again is that issue of how do we weigh different needs? And that's like the study of ethics, right? How do we weigh different goods?
Right.
The good of a potential life versus the good of a woman's bodily, or a person with a uterus's bodily autonomy and their life and their choice and their, ability and options and opportunity for flourishing in a very broken world. And then kind of how do we weigh those things? So I think it's a little bit more about being saved for something rather than from something. So I don't know. I mean, Bill, you may be able to answer that question even a little bit more than I can.
Why is that?
well, just like from your kind of like, you kind of grew up in that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, okay. So growing up in a more fundamentalist tradition, Mary, I would say I never thought of the babies as going to hell, but I was taught that they were human lives and therefore sacred, and their lives being worth protecting. That was the gist of it. I mean, it was very simple. And I think, I don't remember honestly if I told this story online or with you offline, but I remember having this conversation in a class setting with my 8th grade teacher, who was a woman. And if you taught at that school, you were a Missouri Synod Lutheran. You could not be a teacher unless you were part of the church. And someone, and she was very much, would self-described pro-life.
Mm-hmm.
What Mary refers to as anti-choice is also accurate. I mean, she would be anti the choice to terminate a pregnancy. And I remember someone asking the question, but what about in the case of rape? And her response was like, that's terrible, of course, like no question. Why punish the child for something that this rapist, not even, she didn't say anything, there was no victim blaming in it. Like there was no like the mom, but why punish the child for something that this man did? And while I don't buy that, I find it to be a compelling argument, if that makes sense. I don't come down on that side, but I don't think it's something that's easily dismissible.
Right.
If this is a human life and all life is sacred to God, then how do we but here's the question. It's not just how do we protect it, blah, 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 blah. And this is where I think you and I are on the same page, and where I think we differ from the kind of Christians that Mary is describing. What you're helping me articulate for the first time in my life, Kira, is not just how do we protect or save, but like, how do we, gosh, I'm going to say it wrong now that I've said that, right? But I still like, oh, got it. Being that all life is sacred, what's the best way to honor that life? Mm. And I would suggest that honoring, well, this is where I don't know. There are times when honoring, I know. So for instance, we had a parishioner who went off life support a couple weeks ago. And one could say that he made that choice to die. But so some would say that did we honor life by allowing him to die? Or did the system, did he honor his own life? Holding his hand that day, the day that he died, and being with him before he went to sleep and didn't wake back up. Did I come away from that experience believing that he was honoring his own life? 100% I do. So honoring life doesn't always mean protecting it at all costs. Is that am I going too far, or?
No, I think that's exactly right. And I don't always see it, issues of, abortion or sort of pre-birth issues tied with end of life issues, but I think that they're absolutely of one fabric. And when we talk about, this big concept of life and what does that mean? Right. We're also kind of talking about things like end of life care. We're also talking about, what does the church teach about assisted suicide and about, things like that. What is it, and I think that's where it's a very thorny topic, and we haven't, especially as kind of mainline Protestant people, have not really formed people very well.
Well, that's one of the things I was going to ask you is neither you nor I are Roman Catholic, but I think, I guess I want to ask, how do you feel about being part of a denomination whose teachings are not very clear very often?
Yeah. I mean, there are certainly pros and cons, and I think the major con is that when we are not clear about our teaching, people will get teaching from other places.
I'm going to be a jerk. Can you just say that sentence again? I want people to hear her say this again.
I'll say it a little bit more clearly.
No, you said it perfectly, but
like when we as the church are not clear about our teachings, people will get teaching from other places. People will be formed by other things, whatever, TV shows, the media, politics, the books you read. We're not blank slates. And I feel like sometimes we think we are, that if we don't go to church or we don't do certain things, that we'll somehow just be independent thinkers or something, but we're all swimming in water and we just don't ever think about the water that we're swimming in until it gets poisonous.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And then it goes to like when people, and I've harped on this before, but when parents are like, I'll let my kids make their own decisions about going to church. Like you can't make your kid believe anything. Like my kids, I got 3 of them and I make them pray.
Yeah.
In the end, either they're going to buy it or not. I don't know. We'll find out. Like that's their deal. I can't decide whether or not they're going to buy it, but I'm going to make them learn the practice of it. And whenever parents are like, oh, I don't make my kid, do this thing. I'm always like, do you make them go to school? Well, of course. Oh, do you make them do homework? Yeah. Did you choose which school they went to and like are really, intentional about that? And well, yeah. Oh, okay. Like if they punch someone in the face at school, like, do you tell them not to do that again and like talk to them and like, yeah. Oh, so do you make them put on pants when they don't want to? This is an issue around my house quite a bit. Yeah. They have to put on pants. Oh, so it sounds like you actually don't think that they should have to get to make the choice about all sorts of things that, right. And so like we have a responsibility to raise people up into a specific, I don't know, like culture. Is that the right word? I mean, is it culture?
Culture, framework,
context?
Yeah.
I don't know. And I go back and forth too on our church, on the Episcopal Church, in terms of when it's really beautiful that we allow space for people to be all across the board on things.
Yeah.
And then there are times when our desire to be so all across the board and allow people to be whatever creates a situation where we don't always feel like strongly as a church that we can do something like, oh, I don't know, condemn white supremacy or I mean, actually anyone in my church would be open to being like, oh yeah, white supremacy is bad. But then being like, okay, cool. It's manifesting itself in our country right now. And then people will be like, well, now you're making me uncomfortable. That's political. And our inability to discuss that, right? Like my fear of what people will think about me if I say that what our current president is doing by trying to undermine election results is like an act of sedition, like a traitorous act of sedition. It is. That people will be like, oh, that's liberal. And I'm like, well, and I want to be like, no, but here's all the conservatives that agree with me. But like, but the point isn't trying to prove to people that that's not liberal or that it is or that it isn't. The point is when we create this dynamic of a church that is so allowing of all different sorts of ways of thinking, which is great, it also creates a space where it's really, really hard to get us to stand emphatically for anything.
Yeah, and I think there's also, I mean, I was kind of formed in the tradition of pastoral care that's sort of like, I'm okay, you're okay, like listen to your spirit or listen to like where your soul is guiding you or whatever. But if you go to a doctor and you're sick, you want the doctor to tell you what's wrong with you.
Right.
And then to hopefully prescribe something or,
right.
And so much of the time, we as clergy or we as the church, we, lay leaders,
right,
professional church people are sort of afraid to make those diagnoses sometimes and to kind of say like, hey, if you come to me and you're doing something in your life that I think is not consistent with the gospel or with, how we would hope to live our faith out in the world, I would hope that I would have the conviction to like tell you that.
Right. Like someone comes in with a broken leg and they're like, doctor says it's broken, but I'm not going to get it. I'm not going to. And you're just like, well, that's your choice, I guess. I don't, Or like if you, back to your earlier analogy, like if you go to the doctor and they're like, well, some would say this leg is broken. Who am I to say? Well, you're a physician.
Yeah.
Looking at an x-ray. Yeah, I mean, sure. From one perspective, it's broken. In another perspective, you now have two different bones where there used to be one. And that's what, more is good. What's the why value one bone over to, like that's how we can be sometimes about things. And it really, really mushy about it. And I don't get that. Anyways, so, okay. Andrea Rogers. Sometimes with chat, and you don't know folks as well, you can't tell. Andrea Rogers is, she won't mind me saying this, just a radical. She's a radical liberal. You got to watch out for Andrea Rogers. And she is she's the head of our liturgy board. She's on our vestry. she was on my search committee. She was one of the first people at the church I met. So Andrea's just a faithful gal, wonderful human. And I think this might be Andrea's first time with us. So Kira, you're bringing new people on board. Thank you for that. Talking about this idea of going back to the abortion conversation, because we're going to talk about it. It's going to keep coming up. Also, because we're going to normalize talking about abortion as a conversation for Christians to have and not just have it on very special episodes of Ask a Priest. Are you okay with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the point is, it shouldn't have to be this huge topic every time. We should be, or it is a huge topic, but we talk about things like heaven and hell and like the salvation of souls, and about like, right now, like talking about our government and talking about, 350,000 dead from a pandemic. We should be able to, like, why not this as well? Why is this somehow less approachable? So we talked about mental health today already. Okay. Andrea says, given the argument that my 8th grade teacher made, have you, has she ever talked, like, what about talking to a child of rape? Like, this one's always tough for me. And I want to know what you do. Like, whenever people say, well, what about, like, whenever we say we're doing the unborn child or the fetus, whatever you want to, the potential life or the life, doing them a favor by terminating the pregnancy, that makes me nervous.
I think that's a good impulse, because the issue for me with the rape and incest conversation, like, well, what about in terms of rape and incest? You're already then kind of like making conditions for like when it's okay. And again, I think that first time that we met, your whole thing that you got from the book was like, what if we listened to the people who are carrying these pregnancies?
Right.
So there is it could happen, and it has happened, that a person who experiences a pregnancy that was born out of an awful situation, rape, incest, some other kind of tragic circumstance, may choose to keep that life and bring it into the world and be able to form a story about something good coming out of something evil.
Yep.
And I would never want to not let somebody make that choice for themselves.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the other choice may be, I don't ever want to think about this horrible thing that happened to me again. I need to terminate this pregnancy and just close this chapter, be done with it. And that's another choice that somebody can make. And there are a variety of choices sort of in between. And it is really about what kind of meaning, what kind of experience that person is having. Right.
Well, and I like relocating the conversation in terms of not just deciding that we're looking out for the best interest of the unborn child, whether it be officially a life or a potential life. And I think there's ongoing conversation around that. But relocating the conversation about like, okay, we have questions about what this life is and what it means. We shouldn't have questions about what the life of the woman standing before us pregnant with the child means. And what does it mean relocating the conversation around her and what she thinks is best for herself and her body? And even if she makes a decision that is painful, and well, actually in that situation, every decision is painful.
Yeah.
So knowing that, like relocating it there, right? That's interesting. I mean, that's the thing I keep having to come back to, is like the thing that your book keeps reminding me is like that we're still having to prove the personhood of over 50% of the population.
Yeah, and it's an unpopular question, or it's an unpopular move, I guess, in sort of the broader conversation, because we can go back and forth. We're never gonna really have, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say never. Probably in our lifetimes, we're not gonna have a really firm answer about when life begins. When does a person get a soul? When does
Right.
There are all these questions that has changed throughout the centuries based on medical knowledge, based on spiritual, changes,
Right.
theological changes, philosophical changes. And, so part of my move is kind of like, what if we sort of shelve that question for a little while?
Right.
And I think we don't want to shelve it because we want to kind of go back and forth and have sort of enemies on, well, this person wants to kill babies and this person, whatever else. So, but to coalesce around, how do we support a pregnant person? How do we work towards conditions that are, flourishing, that create flourishing for children and for women and for families, in all sorts of ways. Like that's a less, in some ways, it's a less divisive conversation.
It is, but I think the actual conversation that needs to be had is about a woman's personhood.
Yeah.
So I'm saying this the reason I was looking down was not so I could pay attention to other people, but that I wanted to find this article because as of, I think it's today, but I want to make sure I get that right. As of the end of December, at the end of the year, here in Ohio, our governor just signed into law a law that a woman has to choose burial or cremation for the aborted fetal tissue and has to pay the cost of it as a part of the abortion. That's in my state of Ohio.
Yeah.
And here's what I want to say is whether or not you believe that abortion is the right way to go, that is a punitive and shaming behavior. They go, well, if I can't outlaw abortion, I'm going to punish the woman for getting one. And that to me is like not the same, like that doesn't protect. If you believe that the fetal tissue is a human life, what you are doing is not in any way honoring or supporting or defending that life. It is shaming women, even if you are pro-life, so to speak, by the definitions, the crude definitions that we've accepted in our culture, pro-life, pro-choice. Pro-life people should be against that bill. That shouldn't be and my concern is that when we talk about the proponents of the major proponents of pro-life things are pushing things that in their essence shame and dehumanize women as a way of being like, well, you know, like it's we can't outlaw it, so we will scandalize and punish you and punish you. You know, this is financially punitive.
Yeah, it's you know, it's one of these very bizarre things to me where, like, just put yourself in the shoes of somebody who finds themselves
Right.
unexpectedly pregnant, and you're going through all of the myriad choices that you might have, and you come across this, like, well, if I do have an abortion, then I'm going to have to pay for some kind of burial. Is that ultimately going to be something that changes your mind? Because I feel like it's not.
Now, when you make really, really crappy decisions, and I don't mean that the decision's bad, but you have a bad choice to make.
Yeah.
Right? When you have to make a choice that's bad no matter what. I mean, one of my favorite lines of the last 10 years in movies is in the movie Argo, when they're like, we only have bad decisions to make. Like, they're trying to get these people out of Iran, and they're like, well, this is a terrible idea. And he's like, we only have bad ideas. That's all that's left.
We only have bad decisions.
And the guy goes, so you're telling me that this is the best bad idea you have? And the guy goes, sir, this is the best bad idea by far. And like, I talk about, like, that is canon for me. Like, that is like part of my thinking all the time, right? It's super Augustinian, by the way. But like, that is like, oh, so which terrible decision so you've got, by the time you've made the decision, or you're like, oh, I'm going to make the decision. And then someone's like, oh, well, by the way, you're going to have to pay for the burial, and you're going to have to choose. Like, that saves 0 lives.
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
And Andrea's point, I mean, this is the thing where I'm just a total traitor to my sex and gender. What about the man or men who helped in the process of creating a life? I posted something, I've never gotten more blowback in anything I've ever posted on Facebook, but then the time I posted that 100% of unwanted pregnancies are due to men. Not 95%, 100%. And someone was like, wow, but no. If a man had not participated, it wouldn't have happened. Period. 100% of unwanted pregnancies, men are, if not what fully responsible for, are majorly responsible for, and share at least equal responsibility. At least equal responsibility. And yet, all abortion legislation is targeted at women. Like,
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I was on a podcast where I was sort of the pro-choice voice again, and with two sort of pro-life men, again, kind of using this.
Yeah. The messy titles we've accepted, right?
Kind of a Christian. We shared a Christian faith, so we had that kind of vocabulary in common. And I did find it interesting that the gentleman that I was kind of in dialogue with on this podcast, his kind of angle that he was coming at the abortion conversation with was, it's men who need to step up. And if they are involved in an unwanted pregnancy, to then step up and take care and be present and help support in raising that child. And there's some gender stuff there that's a little weird and gross, and but yes. I think it does, that conversation does help, like, shift
it moves the needle, even if it's not where you're at.
Yes.
Any conversation that requires men to take any responsibility in a pregnancy is moving us in a healthier direction than when a woman gets pregnant. It's something that it's either that she's done something right or done something wrong. But it's all about that. Like, we judge a pregnant woman, inherently. Judge that they've done it right or judge that they've done it wrong, if that makes sense. But anyway, Albert's jumping in. Do you want to read or do you want me to read?
I will read. Kira, I'm afraid I missed your last appearance, so ignore me if you've addressed this. Do you see your argument in favor of choice resting fundamentally on the uncertainty with regard to when life begins, such that if there were absolute scientific certainty about fetuses being human, you would oppose abortion, or are you still pro-choice in that thought experiment?
First of all, thank you for knowing what WRT stands for. I was like, oh, I didn't do that. I didn't make you read it because of that. But when I saw that, I was like, it's like when we're doing Bible study and someone's like, I don't want to read this. I don't want to read this verse. There's too many names I can't pronounce. That's how I felt just then. So I'm glad you knocked that out of the park with the WRT. This is the tough question for me. This is one of the toughest. Like from as I process my own beliefs and feelings. If God came down from heaven, didn't tell you to be pro-choice or pro-life, by the way, which would be God's move. God would come down from heaven and tell you one thing categorically that didn't make it easier for you. That's how God rolls.
Jesus would just ask you a bunch of questions in return.
Come on, Jesus, right? But like God, so God comes down and says, human life begins at conception. And from the moment of conception, whatever you call that thing, the fetus, is a human life, and then leaves. Wait, I had some questions about legalities. Gone. God's gone. God has now, you and I are Christians, so we've heard God speak, so we believe this now. But that same God has bailed before any questions about how to apply that legally has happened, which with the exception of Exodus is basically God's move. Right. I mean, in Exodus, he's like, I'll stick around for days, but that didn't pan out well with the golden calf. So like, okay, so God bails and here we go. Like, what do we do? Where do you sit with this?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I find this question not amusing, but like, I feel like it is coming from a place that maybe assumes I'm a little bit more pro-choice than I actually am.
Fair enough. No, that's what you get for writing a book.
I know, like it's on the title, right?
Didn't call it like sort of pro-choice and Christian.
But I mean, I think I would say that yes, I mean, is the short answer to the question. And
but yes, what?
Yes, I would oppose abortion.
Oh, okay.
And it would also change a lot about how we deal with a lot of things. Like, what would that mean about in vitro fertilization?
Right.
What would that mean about our ethical duties as Christians with regard to that? And how does that affect, I have friends right now who are a lesbian couple, a same-sex couple, who are exploring in vitro fertilization in order to grow their family.
And the reason that's my understanding, just so I can follow your logic, like the reason that would call that into question is in vitro fertilization usually requires there to be like they fertilize a bunch of eggs and then freeze them and then implant a bunch of them to see what happens. I just watched this season of Friends where this happened to Lisa Kudrow. So I'm really caught up because Phoebe ends up having triplets, so theologically deep here. But so the idea being like in vitro fertilization requires us to some degree treat these fertilized embryos as, I mean, there's some collateral here.
Human people, yeah. I mean, it would change a lot about how we even think about miscarriage, which I think the church needs to do a lot better at.
Yeah.
Whether that's a desired pregnancy or an unplanned pregnancy, that would essentially raise the stakes to like, this was not just a potential life, but an actual human life.
Yeah.
And to be clear, like I absolutely think the potential for human life, which starts at conception, should be fostered, if at all possible, should be promoted, should be sought after. And it's those other bad, again, the kind of not bad choices that people individually make, but the kind of bad choices of the situations that we're thrust into often, that can lead us to choose against that.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to push back on Albert from a different perspective, and Albert, and you articulate in conversations you and I have had, however briefly, privately, but also in the questions you've asked here, you seem to be coming from the place where I have been most of my life. And I'm finding myself in a different place now, but I'm really trying to be careful not to use language like, oh, but I've grown, because I don't know that I've grown at all. I've changed my mind about some things. I'm in a different place about it, but I really love the questions you're asking, because they're questions that I continue to wrestle with. So I want you to know that I'm pushing back from that place, right? But I mean, my genuine curiosity is, how could we possibly decide categorically and with scientific certainty when something becomes human? What's the definition of becoming human?
Yeah.
We don't have any definition we create of that. To me, would have to be a culturally accepted one, accepted sort of by consensus of a people, rather than a scientific, like a scientific reality. Andrea, thanks for being with us. You can always watch the rest of this later on. And all of the ones we've done before are on YouTube. So anyone who joins us, you can always come back, or you heard about one of the ones. Kira and I have had some, mostly because of her, really fantastic conversations the last month, and you can check out any of them. I'm really proud of the sort of evolving conversations specifically around abortion and Christianity that we've been having, among other topics. So please check those out. So Gary Lubin, who's our deacon at the church, mentions potentiality. And so there's that idea of, is it a potential life? You've used the language potential life. I've heard you say that.
Yeah, and it's something that I certainly use in the book in terms of potentiality, which is a good way to think about it. And I'm also thinking, like, your kind of question about, what does it mean to be human, and what makes something human, and the way we as a society, and even as Christians, have participated in the dehumanization of so many classes of people. I just finished watching the Crown episode where they go and visit the sisters with the developmental delays.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen any Crown, so you're not spoiling anything because it's actual history, but
well, just like in terms of like the institutionalization of human people who are differently abled, who are developmentally delayed, who are mentally ill,
right?
We have, who are, even the way we treat people that are in prisons, those are human lives,
right?
And we just have so much better we can do on all fronts of protecting and valuing the sacredness of human life.
Right. And we don't like, I get why this is a ditch to die in for a lot of people, because if it's a human life and we're just ending them, that's a big deal. But on another level, it's really convenient to defend an unborn life when there are so many people who have been born whose lives you refuse to defend. And I read something recently, but it was on social media, so I'll never find it again. It's ephemeral, although but let me sidebar. So what if it's ephemeral? Like, first of all, for the first however many thousands of years of people's existence, all entertainment was ephemeral. It was theater that was never recorded. It was music that was never recorded. You were either there or you weren't. So people are like, oh, social media and this and that and digital music, it's so ephemeral. Yeah, so what? Like, that's the way it's always. Just get over it. Like, you don't get to own everything, right? Forever and ever. But this person basically posted, like, it's actually really, and it was a Christian writer who basically said, it's really convenient of the movement to defend unborn people who can never challenge you, who can never, who haven't in your mind done anything wrong. It's easy to love things that you deem as perfectly innocent, and who have never in any way inconvenienced you personally, and whose lives don't challenge you by their very existence. And the moment someone's born, they become a challenge. I remember, as I've mentioned, we have children, and my wife always said they're so much easier inside than they are out. Like she likes being pregnant. She was a person who actually did not hate pregnancy. And for some people, it's just excruciating. For Krista, it really was a positive experience. She has a chronic sleep disorder and some anti, what do you call that? like fibromyalgia. She's been diagnosed with fibromyalgia and narcolepsy and some other things. And when she's pregnant and nursing, all of the symptoms for her issues are minimized.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so when she's not pregnant or nursing, they come back in full force. And so for her, it's great, right?
Mhm.
But like inside, but once they're out, you have to deal with them. Once they're out, they talk back. Once a baby is out of your body, they're in the world and they're talking back and they're having to be dealt with and everything. And like, you have to feed them with food that you don't just feed them with your body. You have to like do things. You have to change them. You have to like everything. So there's something really convenient about defending a life beforehand and not after, you know? Ooh, a new question from Josh A. Is Josh A one of your folks?
I think it might be. Yeah, he might be.
Adjacent to this convo, do advances in medical tech, which allow for earlier viability of fetuses outside the womb, change how late an abortion can or should happen? This doesn't affect for first trimester abortions, but anything after that.
Yeah, I think this is another one of those questions that's sort of like yes and, or like yes and no. Because I think there are, you get into questions about like viability and like what does viability mean?
Right.
And we have the incredible medical advances that can support a child as early as like 20 weeks.
Right.
And yet they're, one of the big political conversations that happens is around like what late term abortions.
Yep.
And like you had kind of said, Phil, like your change of heart on this topic came from kind of reading about the circumstances in which those happen.
Right.
Which are mostly incredibly tragic.
Right.
And like just really gut-wrenching circumstances involving illness. And I was listening to this podcast the other day where they were talking about a woman who was pregnant and she was in the ICU with coronavirus, and they basically had to make the choice to have a C-section so that she could then be intubated more easily and potentially live. And like, so these are like the very like awful real life medical
right
circumstances that people are often up against. Maybe we don't hear or see about those. They're
right.
very personal, and people who talk about them publicly, who have written articles about them and whatever, it's a very just a personal, private, I don't want my medical history blast all over.
I having been a man, always not having had to deal with any of this, but having been around and with my wife through 3 pregnancies that were all 3 that were carried to term. She had 3 very early miscarriages between our second and third child. And how we talk about that varies. Would you say we had 6 kids? And I'm not saying that lightly. Like, I mean, that's part of the conversation, right? But being around her in her development, in the development of our children in the womb, the idea that someone would carry a child to 6 or 7 or 8 months and then just decide, nah, like it's an insult. It's insulting to assume. And when you look at first of all, the number of late term abortions is so minuscule. And secondly, the reason for them overwhelmingly is for medical life-saving or something like that of the mother. It's or because there's something radically, terribly medically wrong with the child in there. And like I'm actually now way more like radically for late-term abortions than early. Like if you had to give me a choice, Phil, you can only have first term or third trimester. Which would you choose? Which is a dumb hypothetical, but we're filled with dumb hypotheticals in this world. I'd be like, did the late term abortions, you've got to allow for them because like they don't, that is not birth control in the way that is not abortion for birth control, the way that people talk about it.
Yeah.
That's not about convenience. Like
again, like I want to come back to this issue of choice, because I have been as a chaplain with women who have given birth to babies who have died very, very shortly, that they knew they were going to give birth to a baby that was going to die very, very shortly after the birth process. And for that woman, that was a meaningful experience to get to hold that baby, to have me as a chaplain bless that child in some capacity. You know, that is not something I would want to take away from anybody.
Right.
And yet it is just as valid of a choice to say, I do not have the capacity to go through the birthing process to give birth to a child that is only going to die within minutes.
Right. Right. You keep relocating us back where we need to be in my mind, which is like women, and especially women who are experiencing it, should have a bigger say.
And like, to your point about, should I say that we had 6 kids? You know, what does that mean? If that, like, to me, if that is the story that helps with the grief of losing those 3 pregnancies, that we had 6 kids and 3 of them are living, and we lost 3 very early in, you know, pregnancies, like, I think that's a valid story to tell.
Right. I did okay in supporting her in those times, but I could have done way better. And I knew she was grieving, but there was a part of me that just it wasn't me, and I didn't know. And I can, you know, I'm not trying to make myself out to be like a total sociopath. I either am or I'm not. You guys can decide. But like, as a man who wasn't experiencing it in my own body, I have no idea. And what I get concerned about is when we legislate or judge, when men who are overwhelmingly the legislators in our lives when it comes to literal law, right? And run culture, oversee culture in a major way. When we either legislate or judge women based on something we can't understand, not because we're not sensitive enough, because we don't know. We don't have the equipment to know. We don't have the capacity to understand. Like, I mean, that's been the big shift for me.
I don't know if you saw recently, I think maybe it's yesterday, I can't keep track of days, but Meghan McCain, who recently had a child, came out in favor of paid family leave. And with the reason, like, she just had a baby and kind of had to make these decisions about, you know, oh gosh, I have the freedom, I've got the kind of job where I can take a little bit longer as of leave because my pregnancy was particularly physically difficult recovering from it. And she had the personal realization that, like, oh, not everybody gets this choice.
Right.
And in some ways that's very maddening to me.
Right. Well, yes. I know why, but say why anyway.
Because it's like, you shouldn't have to personally experience something to hear how it negatively affects people, or and again, I think I used this term in our first conversation, but this sort of empathic imagination. Like, just imagine you're in a different person's shoes and what that person might need. And then you sort of start to see all the benefits that you might have. And then, you know, so I'm certainly glad that she has gotten to a point. Again, I think paid family leave should be a pretty, like, that's a pro-family policy. That should be something that I think both sides of the aisle should be able to kind of agree on from different ends, maybe.
All right, communist. I mean, by the way, that's the level of normal discourse in our country.
Yeah.
So you are a Soviet spy, basically. No, I have mixed feelings as well. When you hear men say, well, now that I have daughters.
Oh gosh.
Right. Now that I have daughters, I'm against, like, sexual harassment, you know. Oh, good for you, I guess. On the other hand, personal experience is the biggest vehicle for transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my whole understanding of LGBTQ plus persons in the world and in God's eyes was transformed when my dad came out of the closet. How could it not be?
Yeah.
So did I need a gay dad to get there? I don't know. It's what it took. I don't know if I would have found out otherwise. I don't know if I would have gotten to a different place without that happening. I just know what it took for me. And I'm really grateful for him, not just for what he did for me in that sense, but I'm just grateful for him as a person. I mean, he's my father and my life. I owe everything, literally my life, to my dad and my mom. Right. So duh. But I thank God for that personal transformation. Would I have read this book were we not friends? I might have bought it and let it sit on my shelf so that I felt smarter.
Yeah.
Right. Just kind of like osmosis. Right. But like, it's been I'm not kidding. Like, your book has been transformative for me, but I don't know how much of that is because my friend wrote it. And so I was willing to read it differently. I don't know, so I feel the same way you feel. You're like, it took that. And on the other hand, well, yeah, we're people.
Yeah.
I mean, we are really seeing just how human humans can be right now.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah. On some level, we're grateful anytime someone moves towards justice in their thinking. And we don't want to shame people for how they got there. We had so many other questions.
And we didn't get to any of them. You were like, what are we going to talk about tomorrow? I was like, I think we'll figure it out. Like,
you're getting to know me. I get nervous about this stuff, because I don't want to bore people, and I don't want to waste people's time. But if you've asked us a question and it didn't get answered today, which is all of you, except for Mary Osterbrock, we've got the questions. I screenshot them. We will address them in future podcasts or whatever we want to call this, episodes, streaming events. We will, Akira, can you come back next week?
I can, yes.
Okay. Is your tree up till tomorrow?
This tree is, I don't know. I think I might keep it forever.
Is that your main Christmas tree?
No, our main Christmas tree is still up, though I think I'm going to stop lighting it after tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then we'll probably take it down this weekend.
Well, so conveniently, trash day's tomorrow in my neighborhood. So it might, I think it comes down tonight. So, which is sad.
I know, it's always sad.
I think if I had a lot of money, I would hire someone. I would decorate my own tree, but I'd hire someone to take all the decorations down.
De-decorating is like one of the saddest things.
What music do you play when you de-decorate? Like, when you're decorating, you're like playing like your favorite Christmas tunes and you're singing. When you're de-decorating, you're just like, I don't know, just put on a podcast or something, I guess. Yeah. What's Malcolm Gladwell talking about today? I'll just put that on. All right, my friend, music.
I have found myself listening to a lot of Casey Musgraves lately.
Good. That's not a bad place to sit.
It's not. She's my girl.
I've been doing a lot of Brandi Carlile lately. And I've been on a Puddles kick. Do you know who Puddles the clown is?
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. And an apologist and an evangelist for Puddles Pity Party. And I don't, when people are like, clowns scare me, I'm like, you need to get over yourself. My children love him. You can make this work. But he single-handedly got me into ABBA.
Oh, wow.
He did. I was always a snob about ABBA, which is dumb. I now say that was dumb. But he did a version of Dancing Queen that like broke my heart and put it back together. And I was like, what is my problem? Like, if I can listen to him sing Dancing Queen, I can listen to ABBA. And then I put on their gold album, like their greatest hits. And I was like, oh my gosh, every song is a winner. What was my problem?
I felt that way watching the movie Mamma Mia.
I haven't seen it. I've heard so many. It's a very mixed bag for some people. Mamma Mia. People were like, ABBA's great. That Mamma Mia though, I don't know, like, or the movie. Some people love the musical, but not the movie. I don't know. But it got you into ABBA is the point, right?
I mean, I obviously like knew Dancing Queen and some of the other songs, but like watching Mamma Mia, I think I watched it on like an airplane, and like the next like week or so, I was just like bopping around. I mean,
gosh,
those are bops.
Does that movie musical whatever have Save All Your Love for Me?
I think it does.
That is their epic. That might be secretly their best. Like that's, I mean, Dancing Queen is glorious, but Save All Your Love for Me, is that the right name for it? I mean, that song, oh my gosh. It's cinematic. All right, listen, we have overstayed our welcome, as is our want. You are a joy, Kira, to talk to. Thank you for joining me on this adventure and for being so thoughtful and brave and considerate. To everyone who's been with us, Betsy, thank you for being with us. Mary and Josh and Albert and Gary and Andrea and Lisa and Leslie and Kathy. So good across the board. Thank you for being with us and joining us. And we'll be back at it next week at the same time. Sound good?
Sounds good. Good to be with you all again.
And now we do the awkward fumbling of me trying to stop the live stream.